you have to do the work. And what I mean by that is you have to research the opportunity, right? You have to do like a deep dive into thoroughly assessing what is the opportunity here. I was never scared to get the advice or opinion of others, right? And I always viewed that as there are people out there who know more about a particular topic or category or issue, and luckily have had the benefit of meeting a ton of very smart, accomplished, qualified individuals over the years.
Welcome to Maker's Mindset. I'm your host, Nancy Twine. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Janki Lalani Gandhi, Managing Director at Parkwood Ventures. And before taking on this role, Janki spent nearly 2 decades in investment banking, advising some of the most iconic founder-led brands in fashion, beauty, and personal care, like Paige, Vince, ALC, Alexis Bitar, Supergoop, ILIA, and many more. Her impressive work has earned her recognition as one of the most influential women in mid-market M&A by mergers and acquisitions, as well as a top spot on WWD's Top 40 Under 40 in the fashion and beauty industry. Let's go ahead and jump in. Well, welcome, Janki. I am so excited to have you here. I feel like this was months in the making. And I'm just so glad that we've been able to stay connected over the years because we have, a lot of history back when you were at Goldman and I was building Briogeo, and just all of your advice and perspective was so, so helpful. And as you started to make, career transitions, it's just been so inspiring to kind of see you take that experience and apply it to something else. And so you spent so much of your career in investment banking. What first drew you to that world? And what are one of the lessons that you learned in the early days that still sort of shows up to you now?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, I was not actually drawn to investment banking. When I was at Penn, and I had transferred there as a junior from UCLA. Literally everybody at the Wharton School wanted to become an investment banker. And I remember thinking after going to a couple of info sessions, I was like, I absolutely do not want to do that. Had come across a number of very stereotypical individuals who sort of fit the mold of what an investment banker was thought to be. And I had wanted to go into consulting, but I graduated in 2003, which was after the tech bust. And the banks had fired way too many people during the downturn. So they were the first ones to hire people again. So it kind of happened by default. And so I've always viewed myself as the accidental investment banker.
I didn't realize that. I didn't know that.
And somehow I lasted everybody that was supposed to be like the diehard, like I will like investment banking or, nothing. So I was able to sort of, again, just I think persevere banking overall. But I also had the benefit of one of my early firms, pretty much from when I started, they were specializing in consumer. So being in consumer and branded consumer in particular, so having exposure to founders in apparel, beauty came later, but being around brands that were interesting and exciting is what kept me there for the almost 20 years that I lasted, in banking. And with the question that you mentioned about sort of early learnings that I still hold on to, one of the biggest ones was, especially early on, I would try as much as possible to just listen and observe senior bankers or senior colleagues that I had that were at play, right? In terms of what were their negotiating styles? How did they strategize? How did they talk to the client, right? And I would pick up on some of those things and try to mimic it, at least with regards to what worked for me. So I then applied that, being in the position that I'm now in, or just having become more senior over the years. I really try to bring team members in whenever I can, because there is, in my mind, there's no alternative to someone experiencing it directly, being in the room, being on the call, even if it was, and back in the day, it was all phone calls, right? It wasn't Zoom where you could hear everything and both sides. You would only hear one side of it, but even that, there were things to learn from, even with just that piece of it.
No, absolutely. And I think it's even more critical now that we live in a world in which, so many people are working virtually, but figuring out how to get those experiences where you can be listening in on the calls, learning how to navigate a meeting. Like you have to really be proactive about it now, because I think it's a little harder for some of the younger generations who are coming into the workforce now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that from the remote side of things, there have been certain advantages to it for sure. But there's also been that loss of just, again, being around, like the osmosis side of it, where you're just picking up on things because you're in the bullpen or you're around a bunch of people who are talking about it.
Totally. So I would say for founders out there that are building teams remotely or have a hybrid situation from a leadership standpoint, you have to really hone in on the fact that there's a lot of value lost from not having those everyday interactions. And, how do you make up for that so that you're building a team that can really grow and get promoted and expand? But you need, to prove that you can do that, right?
Yeah, agreed.
So you've helped so many brands, navigate major inflection points, whether it's acquisition or growth capital. When you're assessing a new opportunity or an investment, what frameworks or tools do you rely on to help you determine if it's actually a right fit?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the banking skill set, and I think you were sort of mentioning it earlier on, but there were certain frameworks, methodologies that we learned in banking that I think are sort of universally applicable, right? So when you're thinking about a business plan, growth opportunities, looking at, in terms of a P&L, the margins, the profitability, ROI, right? Those are all the same things that we look at, and brand being at the core. So this is where, having had the benefit of always being in the branded space, for me, most of what I've done has surrounded brands. And there was the importance of making sure to nurture the brands and to not exploit them too early on, right? Having the right pace at which you built these brands into having long-lasting legacies versus being more of sort of flash in the pan type of situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that topic of thinking about your brand as like a legacy brand from the start is so important, because I feel like, we exist in a world in which the barriers to entry into a lot of these different categories, apparel, food, beauty, they're so low. So you have so many more people competing. It's a lot, tougher when it comes to the virality that exists on social media. And it's easy to kind of get caught up in the short term, but really thinking about, what do you want your brand to stand for over the long term? And what are those baby steps that you start taking now to get there? Even if it feels like you're moving a little slower than everyone else, I think it's really important to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where with brand, there was also the tie-in. I mean, having been around consumer, there was then the tie-in to product, right?
Yes.
Where we saw the emergence of these direct to consumer. And a lot of times I'll refer to it as businesses versus brands, because when, there are a number of them that do not exist anymore, right? And when they came out, they were more focused on being marketers and just pushing product, and had been able to get the funding to do so, versus truly being focused on the efficacy, the quality, right, of the product, which then lent itself to brands.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally. So how do you approach those high stakes decisions when, the variables are complex and, the outcomes can be unknown? Like, how do you work through that?
Yeah, again, I don't think it's that dissimilar to what we did with clients, on the M&A side or in banking, at least from the experience that I had. And so first and foremost, you have to do the work. And what I mean by that is you have to research the opportunity, right? You have to do a deep dive into thoroughly assessing what is the opportunity here, right? What are the potential outcomes? Do scenario planning, all of that. I don't think there's any shortcut for, again, doing the work. And then secondly, and I, again, had always kind of done this from a pretty early stage, I was never scared to get the advice or opinion of others, right? And I always viewed that as, there are people out there who know more about a particular topic or category or issue, and luckily have had the benefit of meeting a ton of very smart, accomplished, qualified individuals over the years. And so I'll usually tap into the network in terms of who is a trusted advisor or expert on this that can give some sound advice, right? And use them as a sounding board, frankly, to sort of think through, okay, am I thinking about this the right way? It's hard when it's such a confidential topic that's being discussed. But again, that's where I think having trusted individuals that you can rely on, it becomes very important. And then I'd say the third part of it is really once having the information, getting kind of, I guess, second opinions in a way, bringing it back to, and it used to be the client, now it's sort of my principal or, the team that we have, but it's making sure that everybody understands, right? Sort of presenting the information and that everybody is on the same page about the potential risks, the potential pros and cons, right? All of that. And then just having to move forward, because at least at that point, you then have the confidence of, I've done everything that I could have done. I have flushed this out thoroughly. And then you can't keep looking back and thinking of, oh, we should have done this differently. You can't, the whole hindsight is 2020. It will hold you back if that's what you're focused on. And if you're focused on, unless this is going to be 100%, unless there's 100% chance of this being successful, I'm not going to do it. It's almost never possible, or that's never going to be the case. And so once you've done the work, you've talked to people, you've laid it out, everybody's on the same page. Again, I think at that point you look forward and you deal with sort of what's to come.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to coin this here. This is the Janki framework. I love that. Do your homework. You have to understand the details. And then I love the perspective about tapping into your network of advisors. And one thing I always tell people there is like, listen to everything, but trust your gut on what you have to, weed out or filter out versus what are the things that, really sort of align with that gut feeling. I kind of use the advisor piece to kind of help me recognize like what my gut is trying to tell me when you hear these different perspectives. And then the alignment piece is so important because one, you can't do it all alone. You need a team and they need to be on board too, so that everyone is, giving 100%. Obviously you've been through so much in your career from, advising brands, now at Parkwood, you've had career transitions. And it's so funny because I feel like, this topic of like, how do I become the best leader? It never goes away, no matter how much experience you've had. And I'm curious to know, like, what is something that no one taught you about leadership that you had to figure out on your own?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to leadership, I think that nobody had ever really said that you have to figure out your leadership style on your own. And what I mean by that is, again, you come in and my first job really had been going straight into banking, right? Out of college, had not really had jobs, prior to that. And coming in, and I was at a boutique bank. So it was a small group and there were only the few people that I would look at in terms of their management styles. And I realized that the way that they managed wouldn't necessarily work for me. And also being a female, and I hate having to bring up gender in really any discussions, but the reality of it was that I was almost always operating in male-dominated environments. And there were nuances to how you led, right? Like if you said things too seriously, you were viewed in a certain way. If you weren't serious enough, you were viewed in a certain way, right? And so there was this constant balance of figuring out what works for me, what is my style, and how do I apply that effectively? And even to this day, I'd say throughout my career, I would always get the, oh, well, you come off as being too nice and you don't seem to be aggressive enough. And I remember I was like, well, I grew up in Palm Springs where it was sunny, 350 days a year. So like, that's just my demeanor. I'm not going to change that. I mean, just because I come off as being nice doesn't mean that I can't then hold my ground in terms of tough negotiations or discussions, right? And if I tried to be different, I just wouldn't be comfortable in what I was doing. And so again, it was really figuring out what is my style. And as you become more and more senior, you then have people who are looking up to you and relying on you and looking for sort of direction from you, right? And so you have to be able to, I think, give those directions in an effective way while being able to still bond with those individuals.
Right. And every, team member that you have, everyone has different needs. They have different ways of working. And I try to equate it to so long as like your fundamental values around, leadership are, consistent and tight, then you have some space to kind of flex and sort of try your best to give people, what they need in order to feel, appreciated and thrive and all of those things. But it requires some things that are just cemented that just won't change your values. And then that flexibility depending upon who that person is.
Absolutely. And what I will say is, obviously, when you're at the bottom of the totem pole, there isn't much to lead. There aren't that many people that are really looking up to you. But as you move up and it's every level, you're dealing with your own challenges of what that particular role, right? What your increased responsibilities are, while also trying to find time to sort of, I would say, manage upwards and downwards. So it's I think it's just a constant learning process. And I think you have to continue to evolve, over time.
Absolutely. So obviously between your personal and professional responsibilities, you juggle a lot, right? And I was reading this interview that you did some time back, and you said, you must find a way to pace yourself so it's physical and mental endurance of being able to cope with the uncertainty of what's to come. And with so much responsibility on your plate, how do you stay grounded? And do you have any, personal mantras or mindsets that help to create that steadiness for you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of staying grounded, I really do think that my family, right? Family, friends, those people who really know me from probably early days and spend a lot of time around me, they're the ones who keep me grounded, right? I have a number of public facing elements to my job and did in banking and, do now as well. But I really do view that as part of the job. So it's more of playing the part versus it defining me for who I am. I will all day long prefer to be at home in a more intimate setting with a group of people where we can have, quality conversations and just, again, spend time and bond with people versus being in bigger settings and getting, having all the attention. But I think just overall I'm more sort of low key and prefer to be under the radar versus being out there. I think that personality trait has lent itself over time to just staying grounded. And just even kind of the early, I'd say, beginnings in terms of being first generation, coming from an immigrant family, right? And this part always gets me emotional when I think about it or talk about it. But, when our parents came from India, they didn't have very much, but we never felt, and I'm making emotional. We never felt that it was not enough, right? So we grew up always thinking that we had everything. And now looking forward, we do have a lot more than we had back then. And so the fact that it could all be taken away and we would still be fine is the mantra and where the confidence comes from.
I love that so much. What you said just really resonated with me.
Yeah.
So on the topic of balance, one of the things that often comes up when I'm interviewing professionals, founders who are always also mothers is this concept of like juggling it all and the sacrifices that have to be made and those trade-offs, and that you're never going to have 100% balance. So for you, obviously, your career has been in a lot of ways all consuming. It's always on, but you also have responsibilities outside of the office. So what has been your experience, navigating the two? And what are some things that you've learned about managing the juggle that you think maybe could help others?
Oh my gosh. Yes, managing the juggle. This is probably a daily thought, that takes place in my brain, as well as probably all of the working mothers that I know out there. And when I say working, it's whether you're even if you're a stay-at-home mom, there's constantly this, work versus family sort of trade-off. And I think just overall, I over time had to just get comfortable with, I'm not going to be able to do it all, and there was a private equity person who very early on in my career, and this was well before I had kids, I think she was about to have her second kid. I remember her saying, like, don't let your work life dictate your personal life in terms of like, you can have a family, you can have a husband, you can't, right? You can do all these things if you want it. And she said, what is going to change is that you've probably been used to you're the overachiever who's been used to being like an A+ person in every single thing that you do. And you know what? You're probably going to be a B or a B- person across the different responsibilities that end up on your plate. And I remember not necessarily being able to digest that because again, it was too far before I ended up having a family. But having the first kid, you sort of realize you're like, oh my gosh, what was I doing with all my extra time that I had, right? Because you still have the same 24 hours in a day. I think you just get better at prioritizing. You have to make the decisions. And then having the second kid was like, I mean, that put me over the top in terms of, oh my gosh, I really need to figure out if I am going to have the career that's taking a lot of my time and I travel and, I'm going to have to figure out the other side of it because again, I'm already down to like 6 hours of sleep a night. There's no more I can take out of that. My husband has been a huge part of it for me. So I do think that for anybody doing it, it's having a support network, right? Whether that is a partner, your family, nannies, outsourced resources, right, et cetera. You have to have a support network. I do not think, regardless of if you think there are women out there who are doing it all, I don't think any of them are doing it without a very strong support network that's there.
Yeah. And I think that's critical across the board, motherhood, but then also building a business. And I think one of the things that I got wrong early on was thinking that I could do it all myself. And I tried to juggle all of those roles. And one, I wasn't qualified to do everything. And number two, going back to what you said about priorities, the only way that you can really focus on the things that matter the most that you are uniquely qualified to do is to have that help. So I think that's just kind of, a general theme, both in the office and outside of the office.
100%. I think it's being able to delegate, right? Yes. Which is very hard when, as you said, and you're totally right. It doesn't even matter if it's being applied to motherhood or just having a professional career or starting a business or any of those things. You have to know when to delegate. And I think that's in the delegation side of things. You also have to be able to train people to be able to do it probably as well as you can, right? Having been a founder and having started a business from scratch, you could probably do everything at your company pretty well, right? Because you had to figure it out. But you have to be able to let go at some point, be like, okay, let me again try to train someone else to do it and put the trust in them to be able to succeed in that role.
Yeah, completely. And I think to do what you just said, it all starts with hiring the right people who have both the right values and the right skill set. I would love if you have any just gems to share about hiring and things that maybe you've learned about the process, because I think it's something that, everyone, is constantly trying to figure out how to, optimize and get better at.
Yeah. I mean, with hiring, I feel like more of it was, we of course would have people that we would hire on the banking side, but overall, I think it was more observing what the clients were doing. So all these different businesses who had built, or all these different founders who had built pretty successful businesses, what they had done, to grow their management teams and just their employee base overall. I feel like one of the biggest things to do was it's hard to know what someone is truly going to contribute looking at their resume, right? It's just everybody looks pretty good on a piece of paper. And of course, most of that is embellished to a certain degree, right? In the favor of the candidate. And so really trying to get a sense of, are there people that truly know what that person's done, and not just their references, but just is there anybody else in your orbit that you can find who has possibly worked with this person before and will give you objective feedback, right? And that's not always easy to find, but I do think that now with resources like LinkedIn and there's
totally
ways that you can connect the dots. And then the second piece I would say is especially for bigger hires and sort of key hires where there are big salaries involved and whatnot, if there is a way to have a trial period, I think that is really important, really for both sides, because it's, of course, you want to know what that person is going to contribute and what they bring to the table, but it's also for that person to figure out if this is the right role for them and if this is what they had in mind.
Right. Yeah, that is really great perspective. So I want to hop back into the founder world because we have a lot of founders that tune into Maker's Mindset to get, perspective from women across all different walks of life. And you've done a lot of advising to founders in the past. So I think your perspective would be really helpful here. So when you are advising, mentoring a first-time founder that maybe has, no pedigree, no network, no obvious in. What's the very first move you would tell them to make and why?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is going to be similar to, I think, what I discussed earlier in terms of how we review and assess opportunities. So I would say for that sort of new, possibly first time founder, they should do a deep, deep dive into the industry that they're planning on entering. Right. And what I mean by that is there's tons of research. And again, this comes back to resources and tools that are out there to be able to just, again, assess the landscape for a particular industry. And that also includes players in that space. So whether that's companies or actual executives, founders, et cetera, looking at what the landscape looks like overall, trying to see if there are, again, if there are people in their network, and it's even trying to connect the dots, and it might be a third connection or a fourth connection or whatever it is, but trying to see if there's anybody that they can try to learn from, right? Because I think you were sort of talking about it too, but you want to learn from people that came before you. And I think, and actually you did say this, you said, even though you're going to take advice from people, you still have to go with your gut.
That's right.
And that's a very important distinction, because even if you surround yourself with founders, advisors, right, people who know the industry and have done it before, you are probably looking to do something that's disruptive, innovative, and different than what others have done. So you sort of have to take that advice, I'd say, at face value, or kind of as sort of with a grain of salt, because you're not going to want to follow exactly what everybody else did before you.
Right. Completely. And, you have seen the consumer space from so many different angles: investor, operator, advisor. What are some trends or emerging spaces that you are particularly excited about right now? And where do you think the most undertapped opportunities live?
Oh my gosh. So having been around consumer now since the early 2000s, I still continue to be very passionate about the sector overall. So whether it's the different subcategories in it, right? Beauty, apparel and fashion, food and beverage, et cetera, et cetera. I do think the convergence of tech into consumer, which really heavily came into play, I'd say 10 plus years ago at this point, it's driven a lot of technological advancements, a lot of innovation, and you've seen cleaner, safer products, right, that are out there, and things that are better for you, better for the world, right? All of that. And so I continue to be really interested to see how that's going to affect consumer in general, but again, the world at large and on a global scale. With regards to sort of under-tapped, I think, opportunities, I think that is more of a focus on the end kind of user or the end consumer. And so I think this actually applies. It's not even just in the consumer space, but I would say across different categories and companies, where how do you capture the attention of the person, right? Of that end person. And what I mean by that is there's so much noise out there in terms of competing dynamics and influences that are sort of, what's the word? It's filling up the minds of individuals where they don't have any time to there's only so much that they can digest.
Totally.
Right. And
they're digesting a lot,
like literally every second, especially as they get older. And, it'll be really interesting to see what happens with these younger generations in terms of them coming out of school, going into college, and then just what effect they have on the community overall. If there are companies that can figure out, I'd say, distinct and differentiated ways of capturing the attention, again, of the people, but also doing it in a cost-effective way, because that's the piece where costs have gone up significantly, right? Because there's this race to, again, capture the attention and loyalty of the person. It'll be interesting to see how people combine in-person, real-life experiential, right, with digital, with social media, with just all of these factors that are out there right now.
And AI.
Oh my gosh, you can't.
Which is like, yeah.
Oh my goodness. AI, even though obviously AI has been around for a while and there are increased uses now, you can't forget about AI.
Yeah.
The impact that it will have will be just really interesting to see in the years to come.
Yeah. And I just feel like, even 2-3 years from now, listening back to this interview, I'm going to be like, she was absolutely right, because it's moving at the speed of light. And Yeah, it's wild. So we are done with the interview piece, but before we wrap up, we're going to pivot into the really fun part, which is 5 fire facts, as a way for our audience just to get to know you a little bit more candidly. Are you ready? Okay. One quality you always look for when hiring someone.
I will go with hardworking, but a close second would be sincere.
A brand you didn't work on but admire.
Oh my gosh, there's so many of these. I'll stick to beauty on this one and loved what Sol de Janeiro has done over time. I think the fact that they started off with their hero SKU and basically were able to sort of package up vacation in a bottle and then just extend on that in a beautiful way from a lifestyle brand perspective has been awesome to just continue
Really
to watch.
incredible. Yeah, they're on the top of my list too. Current wellness non-negotiable.
This is one that has been a non-negotiable since I went on garden leave before I joined Goldman. But I will say having a personal trainer at least 2 times a week. And this usually happens between 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. on certain weeknights. And even then I'm usually late, which is crazy because it's in our garage gym. But I've just found that being committed to that has frankly forced me to stay on top of it. And also paying money has forced me to do it regularly.
Awesome. What would you consider a smart splurge?
Okay, so on this, I'm gonna switch to fashion, but I would say power pumps or heels. So I am a heels all day long kind of girl. And frankly, a lot of it came from having been in banking for so long. Just early on, I kind of felt that there was power in them, and being at the same eye level or taller than most men with heels on was just something that kind of became part of my, my fashion motto.
It's so funny you say that because especially, given we've both worked in finance, when I was coming into Goldman Sachs, it was like the Tory Burch flats era.
Oh.
So we just wore flats to the office like every single day. So that's like kind of my go-to.
I love it. Yeah. Mine was, again, it was really being able to stare someone in the eye or look down on them. It worked for me. And I will tell you, that was the one area where, again, there are a lot of things where I'm like, okay, is there a more a lower priced alternative to things, because that's where, again, the immigrant mentality will always be there. But I do think that for shoes, I've found that the ones that I have invested in have stood the test of time. So I would, again, that's what I would advise.
Good one. All right, last one. A personal rule you always live by.
Yeah, so I would say when you try to be who you're not, you really end up dealing with imposter syndrome. And you're then constantly, I think, just not comfortable in your own skin, right? It's much easier to be who you are. And again, it's okay to pick up on things, as I think everybody can probably improve, but stick to who you are, identify your strengths. And again, it's what's worked for me. And I see it work for a lot of people around me.
Such good perspective. Janki, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. And I'm just so grateful to have had you on Maker's Mindset.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for having me. I was super excited when you had even mentioned the opportunity. And I do not do this often, but this was a blast.
Thank you. To stay connected with Janki, the Maker's Mindset community, and me, check out all the details in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your community. Thanks so much for tuning in.